It all began like any other Tuesday evening. I, Adam, came home from work, feeling drained but eager to sink into the comfort of my apartment in Chicago. Instead, I walked into something I could never have imagined, a nightmare that hit me all at once. My wife, Clara, was unusually upbeat, her laughter echoing through the apartment as she texted on her phone. She barely acknowledged me, offering just a quick, tight-lipped, "Hey, Adam," before turning back to whatever conversation had her so absorbed. Something about her mood felt off. It wasn't the usual warmth in her laughter, the kind that once brought me comfort after a long day. This felt forced. Performative, almost. I tried to push the thought aside as I walked over and kissed her cheek, but she barely flinched. "Busy with work," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Dinner felt strained. Her phone buzzed constantly, and every time it did, she jumped slightly, like she was trying to hide something. Every time, she quickly turned the screen away from me, her smile growing wider and more unnatural. It made me uneasy. When I finally asked, "What's all that? Who's texting you so much?" she shrugged it off, saying, "It's just work stuff." But her tone was dismissive, her eyes darting nervously. It was subtle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, after dinner, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, waiting for Clara to join me. But she didn't. She stayed downstairs, giggling softly on the couch, as if she was talking to an old friend, or perhaps someone more than that. Curiosity gnawed at me. I tiptoed downstairs, careful not to make a sound. The dim light from her phone illuminated her face, but it wasn't her expression that made my heart race, it was the message I could just barely make out on the screen: "Miss you already, babe." It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My mind froze. Who was she texting? Why was she saying that? I froze on the stairs, gripping the railing as my thoughts spiraled. Clara must have felt my presence because she suddenly turned around. Her face drained of color, panic flashing in her eyes. "Adam," she squeaked, her voice unnaturally high. "You scared me. What are you doing down here?" I stood, frozen for a moment, before I found my voice. "Who are you texting? Who's babe?" She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, caught off guard. Then came the lies. Smooth, rehearsed. "Oh, just Rebecca. You know how she gets when she's upset, needing to talk about her boyfriend." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she held her phone, the way she couldn't meet my eyes, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Rebecca. "Let me see your phone," I said, my voice eerily calm. Her eyes widened. She clutched the phone tighter, panic spreading across her face. "Adam, don't be ridiculous. It's private. Rebecca would kill me if I showed you." I could feel the heat of realization spreading through me. The gut feeling I had was right. This wasn't just some harmless chat. This was something far worse. Clara tried to walk away, but I stepped in front of her, demanding, "Give it to me." Instead of handing it over, she did something unthinkable: she bolted. She dashed past me, clutching her phone to her chest as though it were the most precious thing in the world. My heart pounded as I chased her down the hallway, shouting after her. I followed Clara into the kitchen, where she was furiously swiping through her phone, deleting messages with trembling fingers. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, slamming my hand on the counter. She jumped, her face as pale as a ghost. "You're insane, Adam. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me?" I barked, the anger rising in my chest. "You're hiding something. Who were you texting? Who is babe?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering for just a second, but it was enough for me to see the truth. Then, as if the guilt weighed too heavily on her, she snapped, "You're paranoid." "Paranoid?" I growled. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me for God knows how long, and I'm paranoid. Clara crossed her arms, her voice dripping with venom. You're so insecure, Adam. Do you think I have time for someone else with my job? You're just, always so boring. Maybe if you paid attention to me for once, I wouldn't need someone else to feel alive. Her words hit like a punch to the stomach. My hands shook, but I held them steady as I reached for her phone, snatching it from her hand before she could react. I scrolled through the messages that hadn't been deleted yet, and there it was, the truth. There were dozens of texts from someone named Mike, saved in her phone as Mick, work. But there was nothing work-related about them. The messages made my blood run cold. You're the best part of my day. Can't wait to see you again, beautiful. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. The words blurred as my hands shook, my stomach turning in knots. Who the hell is Mike? I demanded, my voice thick with fury. Clara's mask slipped for a brief second, and I saw fear in her eyes. But then she quickly recovered, her face hardening, and she crossed her arms defensively. Mike is just a friend, she said, trying to downplay it. You're making this into something it's not. Friends don't call each other beautiful, Clara, I said, my voice trembling with rage. And friends don't say that last night was incredible. She hesitated, and in that brief moment, I saw something in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and contempt that made my stomach churn. Well, maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need someone else to make me feel alive, she snapped, her words sharp as knives. It was like a slap to the face, and just like that, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, it all came crashing down. Boring? Was that what she thought of me? Of us? I stood there, my hands trembling as I held her phone, the words still flashing on the screen. My heart pounded in my chest as her words echoed in my head. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, had just revealed her true colors. How long? I asked, my voice low but shaking. Clara scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was the one overreacting. Oh, don't give me that look, Adam. Maybe if you paid attention to me for once, you would have noticed how unhappy I've been. Unhappy? I repeated, my voice rising. I work my ass off to provide for you, Clara. I'm here, trying to build a life with you, and this is how you repay me? She crossed her arms, the guilt in her eyes replaced with something colder, something darker. Spare me the martyr act, Adam. You're never here. You come home, sit on that couch like a lump, and expect me to worship you for paying the bills. Meanwhile, I'm suffocating, and you don't even notice. Her words cut through me, but I wasn't done yet. So your solution is to jump into someone else's arms? I shouted. To lie, to betray me, to destroy everything we built? She shrugged, like it didn't even matter. You were never going to change, Adam. At least Mike listens to me. Mike? I spat the name like poison. Let me guess, he's married too? Or does he just prey on women who are looking for something to feel alive again? She smirked, and that smirk pushed me further to the edge. You don't know anything about him, she sneered. Don't even try. He's twice the man you'll ever be. That was the final straw. My mind went blank, my body moved on instinct. I wasn't thinking straight, but all I knew was that I needed answers, I needed to confront the truth. I stormed past Clara, my hands shaking as I scrolled through her phone, looking for any clue that could lead me to Mike, anything that could explain why my entire life had been a lie. Jack, don't do this. Clara screamed after me as I stormed out of the room. I stormed out the door, my mind racing 1,000 miles per minute. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to confront this head-on. The phone buzzed in my hand as I scrolled through the messages, finally finding a piece of information that froze me in place, an address, a coffee shop downtown, timestamp just a few hours earlier. Is this where you meet him? I thought to myself as my heart hammered against my ribs. Without a second thought, I grabbed my car keys and raced out the door, slamming it behind me. The drive felt like a blur as adrenaline surged through me. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the coffee shop, my body was on high alert. Every nerve was screaming. I could feel my hands shaking on the steering wheel, but I didn't care. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading for months. I scanned the coffee shop through the windows, looking for anyone who matched the mental image I'd painted of Mike. The smug, arrogant man who thought he could come into my life and take whatever he wanted. And then I saw him. He was sitting in the corner, sipping a latte like he had all the time in the world. Late 30s, well-groomed, dressed in an expensive suit. He looked like someone who thought he could charm his way out of anything. I didn't give myself the luxury of hesitation. I stormed inside, the bell above the door ringing loudly as I marched straight toward him. "Mike," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. He looked up, startled at first, but quickly recovered, flashing me a smile that made my blood boil. "You must be Adam," he said, leaning back in his chair as if this was some casual business meeting. "Get up," I snarled, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Adam," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We should talk about this like adults." I didn't let him finish. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet. The coffee shop erupted into gasps and whispers, but I didn't care. I wasn't there for their approval. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" I growled, my face inches from his. "Adam, stop." Clara's voice rang out from behind me, full of panic. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, breathless and wide-eyed. "Perfect timing," I said coldly, shoving Mike back into his seat. "Now you can both explain to me what the hell's been going on behind my back." Clara rushed to us, trying to intervene. "Adam, please, this is crazy. You're making a scene." "I don't care," I spat, my voice harsh. "I want answers. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" Mike opened his mouth to speak, but I silenced him with a glare. "Don't even think about it," I warned. Clara crossed her arms, her defiance rising. "You want answers, Adam? Fine. We've been seeing each other for 6 months, and you know what? I don't regret it. He treats me better than you ever did." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I could feel the heat rise in my chest as I fought to keep my cool. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I stood there, barely holding it together. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "You throw away 10 years of marriage for this, for him?" She shrugged like it didn't matter. "Maybe I wouldn't have if you'd been half the man Mike is." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, I grabbed Mike by the collar again and dragged him out of his chair. The entire coffee shop watched in stunned silence as I pulled him into the parking lot. Clara followed, screaming after us. "Adam, stop. This isn't helping anything," she cried, her voice breaking. But I wasn't listening. I was beyond reason now. The anger boiled inside me like a raging fire. I shoved Mike into the parking lot, watching him stumble, his expensive shoes scraping across the concrete. Clara rushed toward me, but I didn't care. "Stay the hell away from my wife," I snarled at Mike, my face inches from his, every word laced with venom. "Adam, please." Clara pleaded, grabbing my arm, but I shook her off. "You don't get to tell me what to do," I hissed. "Not after what you've done." Mike groaned, rubbing his jaw as he tried to get up. "You're insane," he spat, his mouth bloody. "You think this is going to fix anything? She came to me because you're a failure as a husband." The words hit harder than any punch could. For a split second, I froze, the anger slipping away. And that was when Mike lunged at me, taking me by surprise. We crashed to the ground, fists flying in every direction. I didn't care about the pain. All I wanted was to make him suffer for what he had done to me. But then I felt hands pulling me away, dragging me off him. Stop. Stop it. Clara was screaming, her nails digging into my arms as she pulled me back. I shook her off, but it was too late. The damage was done. Mike scrambled to his feet, his face bloodied, his suit torn. "You both are insane," he muttered, wiping his mouth. "She's not worth it, man." I turned to Clara, my voice low and cold. "You're both pathetic." Before I could say anything else, I heard sirens approaching. Police. The scene was over. The sirens were getting closer, and the flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what this could mean. Someone in the coffee shop had called the cops. I wasn't sure if they had done it for their safety or out of some twisted sense of justice, but it didn't matter now. I turned toward the approaching officers as they pulled into the parking lot, 2 patrol cars sliding to a halt. The first officer stepped out, his hand hovering near his holster as he surveyed the scene. His eyes locked onto me, then Clara, and finally Mike, who was still brushing himself off on the ground. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice firm but calm. I couldn't even bring myself to speak at first. Clara was the one who jumped in, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He attacked him," she cried, her voice rising in panic. I felt my blood boil at the accusation. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent, not wanting to say anything that would make it worse. "Are you serious?" I finally said, my voice low and furious. "She's been cheating on me for months, and now you want to make me the bad guy?" The officer turned his gaze back to Clara. She didn't even meet my eyes. "I told him to stop," she muttered, crossing her arms, the cool detachment returning to her voice. "But he didn't listen. I've never seen him like this. He's out of control." I clenched my fists. It wasn't worth arguing with her anymore. Everything I had suspected, everything I feared about our marriage, was out in the open now. The second officer stepped forward, his eyes scanning the scene, his expression unreadable. "Sir, can you explain what happened?" My mind was a blur of emotions, rage, disbelief, heartbreak. I knew I had to calm down, but the anger was consuming me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, before speaking. "My wife's been cheating on me with this guy," I said, pointing to Mike. "I found out tonight, and I confronted them. That's what happened." The officers exchanged a glance, then looked at Clara. She didn't deny it. She just stared at me, her face a mask of indifference. "That doesn't justify assault," the first officer said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You can't take matters into your own hands like that." The anger flared in me again, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't going to help anything to argue with them. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "But I don't care about what's justified. I want you both to know what this man has done to me, what she's done to me." Mike was still holding his jaw, clearly in pain, but he managed to stand up straighter. "I'm done with this," he muttered, backing away from the scene. "Good luck with your marriage, man." Without another word, he turned and walked off, disappearing into the night. The officers made their way over to Clara and me, and it was clear they didn't want to escalate this any further. The second officer spoke up. "We're not going to arrest anyone tonight, but we need you both to go home. You're lucky no one's pressing charges." I nodded, not wanting to drag this out. They didn't need to tell me twice. The tension was suffocating, and I was beyond exhausted. I walked away without a word, climbing into my car. Clara didn't follow. When I pulled into our driveway, it hit me that this was the end. For good. We didn't speak as I parked the car. The silence between us was thick and suffocating. It had been a long time since we'd had a real conversation, certainly not one that mattered. Now, there was nothing left to say. I grabbed my bag and started to walk toward the door, but Clara stopped me. Her voice was shaky, but there was a hint of something softer in her tone. Adam, we need to talk. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just kept walking toward the front door, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had happened. Talk about what? I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. There's nothing to talk about anymore. I heard the faint sound of her footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. I'm sorry, she said quietly, but I didn't turn to face her. I never meant for any of this to happen. I shook my head, the bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. You never meant it? I muttered, unlocking the door. You never meant to destroy everything we had? Everything we built together? She didn't respond. Instead, she let out a heavy sigh and walked past me into the house. I didn't go inside. Not yet. I stood there in the doorway, staring out into the dark night, listening to the sound of the rain starting to fall. I realized then that no matter how much I'd loved her, no matter how much I wanted to fix this, we were done. I stood in the doorway, rain beginning to fall outside, mixing with the storm raging inside me. My hands clenched at my sides as I stared out into the dark, trying to quiet the thoughts swirling in my head. I knew I had to leave, but the weight of it all felt suffocating. Clara stepped into the living room, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. You're not even going to come inside? You're just going to walk out? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her anymore. After everything, her betrayal, her lies, I couldn't even look at her. I didn't know how I was supposed to act. How was I supposed to feel? Clara, I said quietly, my voice shaking. I don't even know who you are anymore. I heard her take a deep breath, and for a brief moment, it sounded like she might cry. But then, her voice hardened again. You never understood me, Adam. You never saw how much I was suffering in this marriage. You were so focused on work, on everything else, that you didn't notice me slipping away. I was so tired. Tired of the excuses, tired of pretending this was anything less than what it was. You made your choice, I said, my voice low and steady. And I don't want to hear your reasons anymore. Clara didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the ground. I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every word we didn't say. I walked past her, my heart heavy. As I grabbed my things, I couldn't help but think about everything we'd lost. I wasn't sure if I was angry, heartbroken, or simply numb. But I knew this was the end. The end of our marriage, the end of everything I thought was real. Are you leaving? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I have to, I said, turning to face her for the first time. I could see the pain in her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. I couldn't save her or this marriage. I can't stay here. I'm done. With those words, the final barrier between us fell. The woman I had loved for so long, the one I thought I knew, was now a stranger to me. She had made her choices, and so had I. I left the house without another word, slamming the door behind me. The rain hit my face like a cold slap, but it somehow felt refreshing, like I was washing away the remnants of a life I had no interest in continuing. The drive to my new apartment felt like the longest journey I'd ever taken. Every minute stretched on forever as I tried to wrap my mind around everything that had just happened. Clara, Mike, the lies, it was all too much, and I still couldn't comprehend how everything had fallen apart so quickly. When I finally arrived at the apartment, I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at the blank walls of the building. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of Chicago, but it was mine. I didn't know if it would ever feel like home, but it was a fresh start. I hoped that, in time, the weight of the past would lift. The apartment was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I dropped my bags by the door, my muscles aching from the stress of the past few hours. I needed to think, but my mind kept racing, running through every argument, every text message, every hurtful word Clara had said. I was angry, I was sad, and I was confused, but most of all, I felt lost. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved, my wife, become someone I couldn't even recognize? It wasn't until my phone buzzed in my pocket that I was snapped out of my thoughts. I hesitated, not wanting to look at it, but something in me told me I had to. It was a message from Eric, my best friend. "You good, man? You need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "I'm alive. Barely. Need some time to think." The phone buzzed again almost immediately. "You've got my number, brother. If you need anything, you know I'm here. Don't keep this to yourself." I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not about this. Not about Clara and Mike and everything else that had happened. I needed space, time to think and process. But even in my solitude, I knew deep down that I couldn't stay locked away forever. I spent the next few hours in the silence of my new apartment, feeling the emptiness settle in. I thought about my past with Clara, the good times, the love we shared, but it was all overshadowed by what had happened. The betrayal was too deep to ignore, and no amount of nostalgia could change that. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I finally let myself cry. I wasn't crying for Clara anymore. I wasn't crying for the marriage that had crumbled. I was crying for myself, for the person I had become in all of this. I was crying for the man who had loved so deeply, only to have it ripped away without warning. The tears didn't last long, but they brought with them a strange sense of release. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But I realized something in that moment: I was still here. I was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like I might just be okay. The next day felt surreal. I woke up in the small apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. The city outside was bustling with life, but inside, everything felt still. I hadn't slept well, not because I wasn't tired, but because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's face, her eyes full of guilt and contempt. I saw Mike, smug and confident, like he had won something. I knew I needed to start moving forward, but I had no idea how. How do you move on when everything you thought was real turns out to be a lie? I got up, dressed, and tried to get some semblance of normalcy. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my phone still buzzing with missed calls and messages. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, especially not Clara. The doorbell rang a few hours later. I wasn't expecting anyone. I glanced at the peephole, and when I saw who it was, I froze. It was Eric. I opened the door before he had a chance to ring again. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the place. He looked the same, tall, broad-shouldered, always the one to offer a comforting presence when things went wrong. "How you holding up?" he asked, his voice genuine, but cautious. I didn't have an answer. What was I supposed to say? "I'm alive, man," I said, trying to keep it light. Just trying to breathe. Eric gave me a long look, taking in the messy apartment and my tired eyes. "I know you're in pain right now," he said, sitting down on the couch across from me. "But you can't let her do this to you. You've got to start looking out for yourself. The way she betrayed you, you don't deserve that." "I don't even know who I am anymore, Eric," I said, shaking my head. "I've been trying to figure out where I went wrong, what I missed. I trusted her. I trusted Mike. How could I have been so stupid? You weren't stupid, Eric replied, his voice firm. You were in love. You believed in something real, and she took that from you. But this is her mess, not yours. I couldn't look at him as he spoke. His words were true, but they didn't change the fact that I felt broken. I want it all to stop. I want the pain to stop. Eric let out a long sigh, his eyes softening. You're going to have to face it head on, Adam. You're going to have to stop letting her control you, even if she's gone. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to accept that everything I'd built was gone. That all the years of love and devotion were just a fleeting moment in time. You need to talk to a lawyer, man, Eric said, breaking the silence. You've got to protect yourself. You've got the prenup, and you have evidence. Don't let her take you down with her. I knew he was right. I needed to get everything sorted. I needed to make sure I wasn't left with nothing. But every step felt like another punch to the gut. I had always imagined my life would look different. A house, a family, security. And now, all I had was a pile of shattered pieces. Later that afternoon, I did what I knew I had to do. I called a lawyer. The woman I spoke to, Michelle, was sharp and efficient, everything I needed in a situation like this. Mr. Thomas, it's important to stay calm, she said as we went over the details. I understand this is a difficult time, but you need to focus on what you can control. Your prenup is solid. If she's been unfaithful, the court will likely rule in your favor. Hearing her speak with such confidence helped a little, but it didn't take away the sting. No matter what, I was going to have to face Clara in this process, and that thought alone was enough to make my stomach churn. After hanging up with Michelle, I spent the rest of the day trying to sort through the emotional wreckage. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Clara. I was thinking about me. What was next? What did I want out of all of this? It wasn't about revenge or getting back at her anymore. It was about finding a way to rebuild, even if it felt impossible. That night, I took a long walk around Chicago to clear my mind. The streets were quiet, the city lights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I found myself at a small park, sitting on a bench and staring at the skyline. I used to imagine building a future here, making memories with Clara, maybe even raising a family. Now, it just felt like a reminder of everything that had been lost. The quiet wasn't comforting, but I welcomed it. I needed time to think, to process. The reality was, I was going to have to learn how to live alone again. I was going to have to learn how to be someone new, someone stronger, without her. But before I could get too lost in my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Clara. I need to see you. Can we meet? I need to explain. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to see her, to hear her side of things, but I knew it would only make everything harder. What could she possibly say to justify what she had done? There was nothing left to explain. I thought about the consequences. The divorce was inevitable. I had no intention of forgiving her, no intention of going back to the way things were. But I also knew I couldn't keep running from this. After a long moment of hesitation, I typed a response. I don't think we need to meet. There's nothing left to talk about. I stared at the screen for another few seconds before hitting send. It felt final. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. I didn't need her explanation. I didn't need closure from her. What I needed was to move on, to take control of my life again. The next few days passed in a blur. My days were filled with meetings with the lawyer, paperwork, and more soul-crushing decisions I never thought I'd have to make. It wasn't just the divorce, it was everything. The life I thought I had, the future I envisioned, all of it was slipping away, piece by piece. And no matter how hard I tried to focus on the legalities, my mind kept drifting back to Clara. To the woman who had once been my everything, but now felt like a stranger. I spent a lot of time in my new apartment, mostly in silence. The weight of it all pressed on me, and the loneliness began to settle in. There were moments when the grief hit me like a wave, and other times when the anger flared up, but I refused to let it consume me. I wasn't that man anymore, the one who let his emotions dictate his actions. No, this time, I was in control. Then came the phone call. It was from Michelle, my lawyer. "Mr. Thomas, I need to inform you that Clara has filed for mediation," she said, her voice steady. "She's requesting a meeting to try and resolve the issues outside of court." I rubbed my forehead, fighting the urge to throw my phone across the room. Mediation? Was she serious? After everything, she wanted to sit down and talk about the future like we could somehow make this work? "I don't want to do that," I said flatly. "She made her choice." "I understand," Michelle replied. "But you need to be aware that it could affect the final outcome. If she's willing to negotiate, it might be worth considering. It would save time and possibly reduce the emotional strain." I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The idea of dragging this out in court felt exhausting. Every part of me wanted to just cut ties and never look back, but I knew there were still legal matters to resolve, finances, property, everything we had built together. It wasn't going to be easy, and maybe this was the best option to minimize the pain. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'll consider it. But I won't make any promises." The call ended, but the weight of it all remained. Clara wanted to negotiate? She wanted to talk about the future as if we could somehow fix things. I didn't know if I was angry or just numb. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. The thought of seeing Clara again filled me with a mix of dread and curiosity. What did she want from me now? What could she possibly say to change what had happened? The following week, I reluctantly agreed to meet her. I didn't want to, but I knew it was the only way forward. The last thing I wanted was for this situation to drag on for months. I had to do this, for me, for closure. We met at a neutral location, a small conference room at the mediation center. It was sterile, quiet, and cold, exactly the way I felt about this whole situation. I had no idea what Clara expected from me, but I wasn't going to give her anything she could use to manipulate me again. When she walked into the room, my heart skipped a beat. She looked different, her hair was longer, her makeup carefully done, but there was something about her that felt off. Like she wasn't the same person I had once loved. "Adam," she said quietly, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's been hard, but I want us to be civil about everything. We've been through too much to let this ruin us completely." I didn't answer right away. I sat there, my arms crossed, staring at her. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to hear about how she was sorry. None of it mattered anymore. "Clara," I said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm done with this. You had your chance. You made your choice, and now we're here because of it." Her eyes flickered with emotion, guilt, regret, maybe even a little sadness. But I didn't care anymore. "I know I hurt you," she whispered. "But I don't want this to be the end of everything we had." I almost laughed. "Almost. You don't get to decide that, Clara. You destroyed everything. This isn't something I can just forget." She sat there for a moment, her eyes downcast, before looking up at me. "I've been trying to fix things," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." The sincerity in her voice was almost enough to make me second-guess myself, but I couldn't let it. I couldn't let her back into my life, no matter how much she said she was sorry. I'm not going to pretend that everything is okay, Clara, I said, my voice steady. I'm not the same person I was before, and I don't think you are either. We can't go back. Not after everything. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. There was nothing left to say. The mediation meeting ended quietly, and I walked out of that room feeling strangely lighter. Clara didn't try to hold me back, didn't beg me to reconsider. She didn't even attempt to reach for the life we had built. It was as though she knew it was already gone, just like I did. But even in the silence of that room, I could feel the remnants of what once was, the echoes of our shared memories that we both had abandoned. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and attempts to untangle the mess Clara had left behind. My life had been flipped upside down, but now, at least, I had the sense of control. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of my happiness anymore. She had chosen her path, and I was done following her down it. But there was still one more thing I had to do. The house. The place that had once felt like home now felt like a prison, a reminder of everything I had lost. And as much as I wanted to avoid it, I knew I needed to face it. I called the movers, packed up the rest of my things, and headed back to the house for the final time. The thought of seeing Clara again made my stomach turn, but I had to do this. For me. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I stood outside for a moment, just taking it all in, the place where I had spent so many years with Clara, the place where we had laughed, argued, and dreamed of the future together. But now, it was just a shell. Empty, cold, and foreign. I rang the doorbell and waited. When Clara opened the door, she looked surprised but didn't say anything at first. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking, both of us aware that this was the end. Can we just get this over with? I said, my voice strained. I couldn't stand the awkward silence any longer. She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. We walked through the house together, each room a painful reminder of what we had lost. The living room where we spent countless evenings watching TV, the kitchen where we shared meals and arguments, the bedroom where we once held each other close. It all felt so empty now. This is it, isn't it? She asked quietly, breaking the silence. The end. I stopped in the hallway, turning to face her. I'm done, Clara, I said firmly. I can't keep living in the past, pretending like things are going to be the same. You made your choice, and I'm moving on. I could see the tears welling in her eyes, but I didn't feel the need to comfort her. Not anymore. Not after everything. I didn't want it to end like this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I replied, my voice softening despite myself. But it's too late for that. You've already made your choices. We stood there for a moment, both of us silent, processing the finality of it all. There were no more words, no more apologies that could fix what was broken. I turned away, walking toward the door. I was done. And even though it hurt, even though it felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind, I knew I was doing the right thing. I had to. The door closed behind me, and I stepped into the cold night. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally free. I didn't look back as I walked away from the house. The street lamps flickered above me, casting long shadows on the pavement, and for a brief moment, everything felt surreal. I had just walked out of my old life, closing a chapter one never thought would end. But as I stepped into my car and drove away, something inside me shifted. The weight of the last few months, the pain, the betrayal, began to feel a little lighter. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I needed to keep moving forward. I drove for hours, just letting the road guide me, the engines hum a steady soundtrack to my thoughts. I didn't have any answers, but at least I had the space to think. To figure out who I was now. Eventually, I found myself by the lake. The soft lapping of the water against the shore was the only sound, and I parked the car near the edge, stepping out into the cool night air. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the water, letting the calmness wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I wasn't chasing anything either. I was just existing. And that felt like progress. As I stood there, a figure appeared beside me. I hadn't heard her approach, but I knew who it was before she even spoke. "Mind if I join you?" Emily asked, her voice soft and gentle. I turned to face her, surprised. I hadn't expected to see her again. After our meeting at the coffee shop weeks ago, I didn't think there was a chance she'd want to be part of my life, not with everything I'd just gone through. But there she was, standing next to me, her kind eyes reflecting the city lights in the distance. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the spot beside me. I was grateful for the company, even if I hadn't known I needed it. Emily sat down beside me, her presence a calming one. She didn't speak right away, just let the silence stretch between us as we both stared at the lake. After a few moments, she finally broke the quiet. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle, like she was treading carefully. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I didn't even know how I was feeling most of the time. But something about Emily made it easier to talk, easier to admit that I was still struggling. "It's a lot," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I had, it's all gone." She nodded, as if she understood. "That's a lot to carry." "Yeah," I agreed. "It feels like I'm carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. And I can't just forget it. It's all too fresh." Emily was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the water. Then she turned to me, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You don't have to forget it, Adam. But you can learn from it. You can take this pain, and use it to grow. It won't be easy, but you don't have to do it alone." I looked at her, the warmth in her voice cutting through the fog of my thoughts. "I don't think I'm ready for anything new, Emily. Not after everything." She raised an eyebrow, her smile growing. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to take one step at a time." For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir inside me. Maybe it was the way she spoke, or maybe it was the fact that she understood the pain I was going through without judgment. I didn't know where this was going, or if it was even something I should pursue, but in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't looking for them. What mattered was that I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The night stretched on, the city lights flickering in the distance as Emily and I sat in silence, the calmness of the lake offering some solace. It wasn't the end of my story, but it felt like the beginning of something new. Something better. The days that followed felt different. I wasn't sure if it was because I had finally taken a step toward letting go of Clara or if it was simply the peace I found in those moments with Emily, but I felt like I was breathing easier. There was still so much left unresolved, but for the first time, I wasn't completely consumed by it. Emily and I kept in touch over the following weeks, but we didn't rush things. We talked here and there, but more importantly, she was there when I needed someone to just listen. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, but there was something comforting about her presence. I spent most of my days focusing on work and getting through the motions of life. There were moments of weakness, of course, nights when I couldn't sleep, days when the memories of Clara and what had happened haunted me. But each time, I reminded myself that I had survived it all. That I was still standing. Then came the day I received the final divorce papers. I had been expecting them, but when they arrived, it still felt like a punch to the gut. Signing those papers meant it was truly over. There was no turning back. I called Michelle, my lawyer, and after a brief conversation, I signed the papers and sent them back. It was done. I was free. That night, I sat in my apartment, the weight of the decision finally hitting me. It felt like I should have been relieved, like a burden had been lifted, but instead, I just felt empty. It was over, but in some strange way, it still didn't feel real. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the city. It was late, the streets below glowing with the pulse of the city that never slept. In the distance, I could see the lake where Emily and I had sat weeks ago. It felt like another lifetime. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there she was, Clara. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. What was she doing here? "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching mine. She looked different, no makeup, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She looked vulnerable, and for a second, I saw the woman I once knew. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to shut the door and forget she ever existed. But part of me knew that we needed this closure, if nothing else. "Clara, what do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. I need to explain," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I've hurt you. And I know nothing I say can fix it, but I need you to understand." I didn't answer. I just stepped aside, allowing her to enter. We sat down, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I know what I did was unforgivable," Clara started, her voice cracking. "But I was lost, Adam. I thought I needed more, that I was missing something in my life. And I made the biggest mistake of my life by turning to Mike. It was never about you. It was about me." I didn't interrupt. I let her speak, though every word she said felt like salt in an open wound. "I've spent these past few weeks thinking about everything, the good, the bad. And I realized that I took everything for granted. I took you for granted. And I hate myself for it." Her words hung in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. I didn't want to. "I wish things had been different," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "But I know I've lost you, and I don't deserve you. I don't expect you to forgive me, Adam. I don't even know if I can forgive myself." I sat there, staring at her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. She was right. I couldn't forgive her. I wasn't sure if I ever could. "You broke me, Clara," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "You didn't just hurt me. You shattered everything I thought I knew. And I don't think I can ever look at you the same way again." She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I know. And I'm sorry. I'll never be able to make it right, but I needed to tell you that." I stood up, my heart heavy. "I think this is the last time we'll talk," I said quietly. "I need to move on." "We both do." Clara stood up slowly, her head down. She didn't try to argue, didn't try to make it right. She just looked at me one last time before walking out the door. I closed it behind her and stood there, alone. It was finally over. For good. But as I stood there, a strange peace began to settle over me. It wasn't the end of everything. It was the beginning of something new. Something better. The days that followed felt different. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, worrying about what had happened, or dreading the inevitable awkwardness of seeing Clara again. I had finally taken the steps I needed to heal, signing the divorce papers, letting go of the anger, and putting my life back together. The pain was still there, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy. I focused on projects I had pushed aside for years, and even began planning for things I'd always put on hold. I went to the gym more, went out with friends, and slowly, the weight of the past started to lift. But there were still moments, small moments, when I'd think of Clara and the life we shared. It wasn't that I missed her, it was that I missed the idea of what we could have been. The future that was no longer mine to have. One evening, a few weeks later, I found myself at that same coffee shop where Emily and I had first met. I was sitting alone, nursing a cup of coffee, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see her standing there, a bright smile on her face, her eyes warm with something I couldn't quite place. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, standing by the table with a hint of hesitation. I smiled back, feeling a surge of something unexpected. "Of course, Emily. I was just thinking about you, actually." She laughed softly, sitting across from me. "Really? What about?" I shrugged, my smile growing. "Just, how different things feel. How much has changed." "I get that," she said, her tone light but sincere. "I think we all go through these phases. I'm just glad you're getting your life back together, Adam." Her words, simple as they were, meant more than she probably realized. She wasn't trying to fix me or tell me everything would be fine. She just understood. And that felt good. It felt real. We sat there for a while, chatting about nothing in particular, and it wasn't until much later that I realized how much lighter I felt. How much easier it was to laugh, to be present in the moment, to think about the future without the constant weight of my past pulling me down. Emily stayed by my side, offering a listening ear when I needed it and giving me space when I wanted to think. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people trying to move forward. It wasn't about replacing Clara, it was about finding something new. Something that wasn't tainted by betrayal. Over the following months, Emily and I spent more time together. We took walks in the park, went to dinner, and just enjoyed each other's company without the looming shadow of my past hanging over us. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and neither was she, but there was a bond forming between us. A connection that felt like it was meant to happen. And just when I thought I was beginning to heal, I received a call one afternoon. It was from my lawyer, Michelle. The final paperwork for the divorce had come through, and the last chapter of my marriage was officially closed. I sat at my desk, the phone in my hand, staring at the paperwork in front of me. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. There was no sense of relief, no rush of freedom like I expected. Instead, it felt like the weight of the world had finally come to rest, and in its place was something new, a quiet sense of possibility. A blank canvas. "Thank you," I said quietly, after the call ended, more to myself than anyone else. "Thank you for letting me go." I sat back in my chair, letting out a long breath. The man who had walked into that marriage wasn't the same man who was sitting here now. And while I wasn't sure where my life would take me from here, I knew one thing for sure, it was mine to shape.